Imagine for a moment that the fate of your nation's economy was being decided, not by the officials you elected, nor by the civil servants you trust, but by a handful of powerful figures meeting in secret, away from the scrutiny of the public eye. Now envision this scene not unfolding in the corridors of Washington's power or the imposing halls of Beijing, but in the opulent, storied rooms of a London mansion, a setting steeped in history and intrigue. There are no flashing cameras, no press briefings, just closed doors and whispered conversations. What was truly discussed in those rooms? Who stands to benefit, and who might be left exposed or betrayed? Earlier this June, a high-stakes confidential gathering took place at the stately Lancaster House in London. The Chinese delegation, led by Vice Premier He Lifeng, one of the highest-ranking economic policymakers in China, sat down not with the current representatives of the United States government, but with prominent senior advisors from the previous Trump administration. There was a conspicuous absence of any officials from President Biden's team. The agenda was nothing short of world-shaping: trade relations, cross-border investment flows, and the cutting edge of emerging technologies, each a pillar of modern global power. This meeting did not emerge from thin air. In fact, it followed a private, unpublicized phone call between former President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping, an engagement that reportedly took place without the knowledge or approval of the sitting U.S. administration. The secrecy surrounding these contacts has reverberated through diplomatic circles in Washington and beyond, shaking the very foundation of trust and raising a pressing question. In this era of strategic rivalry, who is truly steering the direction of economic relations between the world's two dominant superpowers? To grasp the gravity of this clandestine summit, consider the immense stakes at play. The United States and China are woven together in a complex web of economic interdependence and fierce competition. On the one hand, they are adversaries locked in a contest for technological and geopolitical supremacy. On the other, they are crucial partners whose economies are tied through trillions of dollars in trade, investment, and supply chains. Despite years of escalating tariffs, blacklists, and diplomatic friction, the economic relationship is far from severed. United States tariffs on Chinese imports currently stand at approximately 350 billion United States dollars, a staggering sum that has rippled through industries from agriculture to electronics. China, for its part, has responded with tariffs on an estimated $100 billion worth of United States goods, affecting everything from soybeans to automobiles. Yet even as tariffs bite and rhetoric intensifies, the trade between these two giants continues to surge. In a historic shift, China's exports to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, commonly known as ASEAN, have, for the first time in the first half of this year, surpassed its exports to the United States. This is not a mere statistical quirk. It signals a profound transformation in the architecture of global trade. Southeast Asia is emerging as a critical hub, a beneficiary of shifting supply chains as companies seek alternatives to the tariff-laden path between Washington and Beijing. The ripple effects are immense for global manufacturing, logistics, and even the consumer prices you see in stores. Beneath these headline numbers lies a deeper, more strategic contest. The two superpowers are scrambling for dominance in the technologies that will define the 21st century: artificial intelligence, semiconductors, quantum computing, green energy, and beyond. At the heart of this race is control over critical resources. China now commands an estimated 85% of the world's rare earth oxide separation capacity. These rare earth elements, names like neodymium, dysprosium, and terbium, may sound obscure, but they are the irreplaceable building blocks of modern life, powering everything from smartphones and electric vehicles to advanced missile systems and renewable energy infrastructure. Dr. Michael Chen, a globally respected expert on strategic resources, sums up the situation succinctly. Economic interdependence creates both vulnerability and leverage. Whoever controls the supply chains controls the future. This is not mere theory. It is the lived reality of today's geopolitics. If China were to restrict rare earth exports, entire industries in the West could grind to a halt in weeks. Conversely, the United States' dominance in advanced chip design gives it a powerful lever over China's technological ambitions. These secretive meetings at Lancaster House are not just a curiosity. They represent a blurring of lines between private influence and public policy. Critics in Washington, including many seasoned diplomats and lawmakers, have sounded the alarm. Shadow diplomacy, they warn, undermines the authority of elected governments and muddies the waters for allies and adversaries alike. A retired United States ambassador put it bluntly, "Foreign governments need clarity, not a guessing game about who's driving policy." Such clandestine engagements sow public suspicion and anxiety. When deals are struck in the shadows, who can say whether national interests were protected or quietly traded away? What guarantees exist that private ambitions are not being pursued at the expense of public good? From Beijing's vantage point, however, these informal ties are a strategic hedge against the unpredictability of United States politics. In an era where the outcome of the next election could mean a dramatic shift in global policy, maintaining relationships with key figures from both major United States parties is simply prudent statecraft. Supporters of these back-channel dialogues argue that they can serve as valuable release valves, keeping communication alive when formal channels are gridlocked. As Professor Elena Morris of Johns Hopkins University explains, back-channel diplomacy can prevent crises when official channels are jammed. It's a way to keep the door open. History offers compelling precedents. In the early 1970s, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger's secret trip to China marked a turning point in global affairs, laying the groundwork for the normalization of United States-China relations. That historic breakthrough began not with public fanfare, but with whispered conversations in secluded rooms. The echoes of that moment still reverberate today. Could the Lancaster House meeting be laying similar foundations, perhaps paving a smoother path for a potential future Trump-led administration, or averting a dangerous escalation? Yet, the risks cannot be dismissed. Without transparency and democratic oversight, unofficial deals have the potential to undermine current policymakers and send conflicting signals to America's allies. Imagine, for instance, secret promises made in London that contradict official stances in Washington or Beijing. Such contradictions could easily lead to missed opportunities, shattered trust, and in the worst case, a dangerous spiral of miscommunication and escalation. Dr. Liu Chen, an expert on United States-China relations, notes the paradox at the heart of these engagements. Mutual needs are constantly undercut by deep-seated distrust. The more the two sides depend on each other, the more a lack of clarity can be weaponized. There's also a tangible threat to economic stability. With nearly $350 billion United States dollars in tariffs still imposed on Chinese imports and Chinese foreign direct investment in the United States, dropping to just under $6 billion United States dollars in the past year, any abrupt policy shift, even one signaled unofficially, could spark wild swings in financial markets and global supply chains. Consider this: nearly 70% of United States companies reported that their compliance costs soared by more than 2/3 last year due to new export controls. These are not abstract numbers. These are costs that ultimately filter down to consumers in the form of higher prices and reduced choices. Meanwhile, China's tightening grip on rare earth processing, 85% of global capacity, means that any misstep, even in a backroom negotiation, could tilt the global balance. The specter of weaponized interdependence looms large. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, an authority on international economic strategy, expects the world to move toward managed competition, a landscape where cooperation in areas like climate change or pandemic response coexists uneasily with fierce rivalry in trade and technology. We need clear rules and dispute mechanisms, she argues, or risk falling into a cycle of escalation and retaliation. Let's pause for a moment and ask, why should any of this matter to you, the viewer, sitting at home or on your commute? Why should a private discussion in a London mansion ripple across your everyday life? The reality is that economic power games are rarely played in the open. The price you pay for your next smartphone, the security of your job in manufacturing or tech, and even the availability of critical medicines, all are shaped by these shadowy, high-level negotiations. When compliance costs for United States companies ballooned by more than 2/3 last year because of new export restrictions, those costs were not the result of public debate or new laws debated in Congress. Instead, they emerged from a maze of behind-the-scenes policy decisions, often influenced by private conversations far from the public record. Understanding this dynamic helps decode the headlines. When you see news about rare earth shortages, new tariffs, or rising cybersecurity risks, know that these are not isolated events. They are the visible result of a much deeper, ongoing struggle for economic and technological supremacy, a struggle that directly impacts the inflation rate, job security in key sectors, and the cost of everything from cars to clean energy solutions. There is also an opportunity here. By staying informed and demanding greater transparency, ordinary citizens can push for smarter, more accountable policymaking. Catherine Tai, the United States Trade Representative, has stressed that the only way to build a sustainable economic relationship with China is to address core strategic competition, not just to patch over disputes with temporary deals. As a consumer, investor, or even a voter, keeping an eye on these developments can help you anticipate how sudden shifts in United States-China relations might affect your wallet or your community. Let's look at potential futures, now that the Lancaster House meeting is out in the open. What scenarios might unfold, and what are the possible consequences for the global economy and political stability? The first, most optimistic scenario is that shadow diplomacy succeeds as a bridge builder. Former officials, armed with personal relationships and institutional memory, use these private channels to clarify misunderstandings and lay the groundwork for formal negotiations. History shows this can work. Kissinger's back-channel talks with China in the early 1970s helped diffuse tensions and open new avenues for cooperation. In today's context, these informal meetings could help manage the transition between administrations or create the momentum needed for a diplomatic breakthrough. Imagine a future where these dialogues lead to a managed competition framework, where the United States and China agree on clear rules for engagement in areas like technology transfer, market access, and dispute resolution. Under such a framework, there could be cooperation on global challenges like climate change, health security, and anti-money laundering, even as rivalry persists in strategic industries. Dr. James Peterson, a leading analyst of international economic policy, describes this as a small yard, high fence approach, focused restrictions on critical technologies rather than wholesale decoupling. This would allow for targeted protection of national security interests without sacrificing the benefits of global collaboration. But there is a darker, more dangerous path as well. If shadow diplomacy is allowed to continue without transparency or clear boundaries, the risks multiply. Secret promises, made outside the purview of sitting governments, can easily collide with official policy, creating confusion among allies and adversaries alike. Imagine a scenario where commitments made in London are contradicted by public statements in Washington or Beijing. The result could be missed opportunities for cooperation, broken trust among partners, or even a slide into open confrontation if one side feels blindsided by a sudden policy shift. In this scenario, economic uncertainty would surge. Markets could become jittery as investors try to read between the lines of official statements and rumor-laden leaks. Supply chains, already battered by tariffs, pandemic shocks, and geopolitical tensions, could become even more unstable. If rare earth exports were suddenly restricted, the price of electronics, electric vehicles, and renewable energy components could skyrocket, derailing green energy transitions and putting millions of jobs at risk worldwide. There is also the risk of eroding public trust in democratic institutions. When high-level negotiations take place in secret, without oversight or a public record, citizens may rightfully ask, who authorized these discussions? Were national interests safeguarded, or were private ambitions served? The legitimacy of foreign policy decisions depends, in part, on their transparency and accountability. As one Whitehall spokesperson in the United Kingdom put it, Lancaster House hosted a private event, offering no further details and fueling speculation about Britain's quiet support for this kind of informal engagement. In the United States, lawmakers from both parties have demanded answers. Was the White House informed? Were sensitive matters of national security discussed? Is this the beginning of a new, unofficial foreign policy track, perhaps even early planning for a potential 2026 Trump campaign? These questions underscore a broader trend, the shifting landscape of global diplomacy. Increasingly, influence is being exercised outside formal frameworks and across the boundaries of administrations. Off-the-record networks, built on personal relationships rather than official mandates, are becoming more prominent. This evolution demands that the public, the media, and policymakers adapt, developing new tools to monitor and assess the impact of these informal engagements. Yet, it is crucial to remember that every major diplomatic breakthrough in the past half-century has started with a private conversation. The world's most consequential deals, whether ending the Cold War, negotiating nuclear arms treaties, or opening up new trade routes, have often begun in secrecy, with just a handful of trusted interlocutors. The key difference lies in what happens next. Are these private overtures brought into the light, subject to public scrutiny and democratic oversight? Or do they remain shrouded in secrecy, risking the erosion of trust and the coherence of national policy. For you, the viewer, there is a lesson and a call to action. The economic and technological decisions being made in rooms like Lancaster House are not just the stuff of diplomatic intrigue. They have real, tangible effects on your life. The next time you see the price of a product rise or hear about a new export control, remember that these outcomes often trace back to the invisible chess game played by global elites. So, as we return to our opening question, are these back-channel talks a sign of savvy crisis management, or do they represent a dangerous breach of diplomatic norms? The answer, as is so often the case in international affairs, is both. Back-channel diplomacy can diffuse tensions, open new doors, and set the stage for breakthroughs, but only if it is ultimately paired with accountability and clarity. If such meetings remain hidden in the shadows, they risk undermining trust, policy coherence, and ultimately, the stability of the global economic system. Here's a secret you may not hear elsewhere. While critics fear these meetings threaten public trust, advocates quietly acknowledge a simple truth. Every truly historic diplomatic achievement of the past 50 years began with a private conversation, far from the public eye. The world's most important deals are born in the shadows, but their real value is determined when they are brought into the light, debated, and made accountable to the people they affect. If you want to keep up with the real stories behind the headlines, where global power shifts are decided not in front of the cameras, but in rooms like Lancaster House, be sure to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. What do you think? Are these secret meetings a smart strategy for peace and progress, or a perilous game that puts democracy at risk? Share your thoughts in the comments below.